Evening, and it's a busy week. I was preparing to do some speaking this week. I try to do it in bunches nowadays because it's just too exhausting to go back and forth after each speaking event. So I plan to speak a few days this week in consecutive places, and U of P comes in the middle. But then on Sunday, when I opened my computer, it was like I was hit with a barrage. There was the Turkel report on what happened, the Israeli report on what happened on the flotilla, which runs to some 300 pages. And just as I finished printing it out and was about to begin reading it, there was the Al Jazeera announcement of 2,000 documents on the so-called peace process, and I had to decide that was going to have to wait until I finished the Turkel report. And then there was a speech by Mr. Nasrallah, the head of the Hezbollah, which I also had to put aside. And then there were explosions in Lebanon, which I'll speak about at some length tonight. And now you open up the computer, and there are events happening in Egypt. So a lot's happening, and for me, I primarily am a reader, which means at this point I should be home trying to keep up with all the reading, but it didn't happen that way. And so I'm slightly discombobulated because I've been trying to do as much reading as I can in the free moments while I'm flying or on the ground with the train, with the Amtrak. In any event, that's my problem, not yours, except to the extent that I like to be accurate and informed. And I got to next to the last page of the Turkel report about 5 minutes ago. I think I can spare myself the conclusions because unlike journalists and most professionals who just read the introduction and the conclusion, I did read the body of the report, and so I don't have to worry about reading the conclusions. I'm going to be speaking this evening about, basically my remarks will be divided into 3 parts. I'll be speaking about what happened in Gaza. I'll then be looking at what happened on the Freedom Flotilla, the Mavi Marmara in particular, and then I'll be looking at where things are headed or seem to be going. And then finally, I know those are 3 parts, but in conclusion, I'll look at what's probably most important, namely what we can do if we want to try to achieve a just and lasting peace. I'll begin with, as I said, what happened in Gaza in 2008, 2009, from December 27th to January 17th. But that's not really where the story begins. The story begins in May 2000, when after a 17-year-long guerrilla war, the Hezbollah, the Party of God, inflicted a military defeat on the Israeli occupying army in South Lebanon. The Israelis were very upset by this defeat. I have to say, folks, I speak a lot, and in the last several years I've not had any disruptions. Everything is quiet and calm. So I hope that's, the U of P is not going to be aberrant in that respect. So let's all make a real effort to just be calm and be reasonable and to have a real dialogue ultimately. As I said, in May 2000, Israel suffered a major military defeat, and Israel was determined to undo that defeat. For Israel represented a diminution, a lessening of what it calls its deterrence capacity. And deterrence capacity is just a fancy technical term for the Arab Muslim world's fear of Israel. And the Israelis were upset or concerned that with the defeat they suffered, that their deterrence capacity had suffered a blow in the Arab Muslim world. Already by 2001, the Israelis began preparing for the next round with the Hezbollah. They patiently waited for a pretext, an excuse, and they found it in the summer of 2006. And in July, Israel launched another assault on Lebanon, one in a long series, launched a major assault on Lebanon. And by the end of the 34 days, unexpectedly, Israel suffered another major defeat at the hands of the Party of God. Mr. Nasrallah, the head of the Hezbollah, he was not shy about boasting, or I should say, he did not refrain from boasting about the defeat he inflicted on the Israelis. He called it the divine victory, and he kept saying to the Israelis, the Arabs aren't afraid of you anymore. We're not afraid. You want to attack, go ahead and attack, and if you attack again, we're going to defeat you again. Well, for Israel, this represented a second consecutive blow to our deterrence capacity, to the Arab Muslim world's fear of it. And so now Israel was determined to restore its deterrence capacity. But it didn't know where. It couldn't go against, it couldn't attack, it couldn't, for a third time, attempt an attack on the Hezbollah, because it knew it didn't at that point have a military option. And so Israel turned to Gaza, its favorite shooting gallery, and it set out to attack Gaza in order to restore its deterrence capacity, the Arab Muslim world's fear of it. But they had one problem in Gaza. The problem was everybody knew that Hamas wasn't a fighting force to speak of. And so even if Israel inflicted a defeat on Hamas, it wouldn't really restore the Arab Muslim world's fear of it, because it wouldn't be a particularly impressive military victory. And so Israel had no choice in order to restore its deterrence capacity, but to inflict massive, indiscriminate destruction of the civilian infrastructure and on the civilian population of Gaza, and thereby to transmit the message to the Arab world that if you mess with us, we'll go crazy, we'll go mad, we'll act lunatic. And that's what they set out to do in Gaza. The background is fairly straightforward and not very complicated. In January 2006, there were elections, parliamentary elections, in the occupied Palestinian territories. Surprisingly, unexpectedly, Hamas, the Islamic movement, emerged victorious. Jimmy Carter, the former US president and one of the observers of the elections, he said they were completely honest and fair. The US and Israel, or Israel and the US, reacted to these completely honest and fair elections by imposing sanctions on the people of Gaza to exact a penalty, or to inflict a penalty, to exact a price, because the people of Gaza had elected the wrong government. In June 2007, the United States, Israel, and some elements among the Palestinian Authority, they attempted a coup to overthrow the legally elected government. Hamas foiled the coup. The Palestinian elements were sent packing to the West Bank. And now Israel, the United States, they tightened the siege of Gaza, a siege which Amnesty International at the time called a flagrant violation of international law, and which the Goldstone report, the report that was mandated by the United Nations Human Rights Council, the Goldstone Report called a possible crime against humanity. The former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mary Robinson, she journeyed to Gaza at this time, and she said, and now I'm quoting her, "Gaza's whole civilization has been destroyed." I'm not exaggerating. Its whole civilization has been destroyed. In June 2008, Egypt brokered a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. And each side had obligations under the ceasefire. Hamas was obliged to stop the rocket and mortar attacks on Israel. And Israel was obliged to gradually lift the blockade of Gaza. The blockade which is a flagrant violation of international law. The blockade that was destroying a civilization. According to the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and now I'm quoting them, Hamas was careful to maintain the ceasefire. Hamas was careful to maintain the ceasefire. But Israel refused to lift the blockade of Gaza. Actually, one of the useful things that came out of the WikiLeaks was that there was a cable sent by the US ambassador, I guess it was, in Israel. And he said, the Israelis have repeatedly told us, or Israeli officials have repeatedly told us, or told us on multiple occasions, that they intend to bring the economy of Gaza to the brink of collapse. What's important about that is now we know we can use the expression straight from the horse's mouth, that they had violated the ceasefire terms with Hamas, because the terms were, in exchange for ending the rocket and mortar attacks, they would gradually lift the blockade. But they told the US on multiple occasions they had no intention of lifting the blockade. They intended to bring the economy of Gaza to the brink of collapse. What happened next? Not very controversial. All you have to do is open up Amnesty International's yearbook for 2009. And for the entry on the occupied Palestinian territories in Israel, you'll read, a ceasefire agreed in June between Israel and Palestinian armed groups in Gaza. It held for 4.5 months. But it broke down after Israeli forces killed 6 Palestinian militants in airstrikes and other attacks on 4 November. The Israelis had begun the planning for the assault on Gaza at least as early as March 2007. When all the pieces were in place, they needed the pretext, they needed the excuse. And so they waited patiently until Election Day in the United States, November 4th, when they knew the attention of the media and the public would be riveted to the results of the historic presidential election. And on that day, as Amnesty said, they invaded Gaza and killed 6 Palestinian militants, and the ceasefire broke down. Israel wanted the ceasefire to break down because it needed a pretext to launch the long-planned assault on Gaza. The notion that the attack on Gaza had anything whatever to do with the Hamas rocket and mortar attacks is just on its face absurd. If Israel really didn't want the rocket and mortar attacks, then as Amnesty International pointed out, it wouldn't have broken the ceasefire. But you know those Islamicists, they're crazy. They're lunatic. And they're so irrational. So Hamas kept saying till the end of December, we're ready to renew the ceasefire. We're prepared to renew the ceasefire. But Israel has to abide by the original terms